Welcome to Lead Pods, the official leadership podcast from USMB for pastors and church leaders, where our goal is to increase our impact together.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 61 of the USMB Lead Pods. My name is Matt Ersman, and I'll be your host today. Well, today I'm looking forward to sharing this conversation with you. Today I'm talking to Brian Harris. Brian Harris is the new church planting mobilizer through USMB, and if you pay attention to USMB stuff at all, you know that church planting is one of our kind of top priorities right now. It's really important to us that we help more MB churches get planted across the country. And so Brian, he's pretty new in his role, but this is what his job is going to be all about, is helping USMB churches plant and to help revitalize some churches who might need some help. And so Brian's got a really great story. If you haven't heard it before, he's got a really interesting start about how he came to faith and got into ministry. I think you'll enjoy hearing that, and he'll also share some of his dreams and thoughts about where USMB church planting can go from here. So I think you're really going to enjoy hearing from Brian. So let's take a quick break to hear from a sponsor and then get right to my conversation with Brian Harris.
Lead cohorts are starting in September, and it's not too late to join. In a cohort, you will meet with a small group via Zoom to explore topics pertaining to life and ministry. With 11 cohorts to choose from, you're sure to find one that will enrich your journey. Find our lineup of fall cohorts or sign up on the USMB website at www.usmb.org/lead-cohorts.
All right, my friends. Well, today I'm excited to introduce you to Brian Harris. If you were at the convention with us just a few weeks ago, you probably saw Brian on stage and he briefly shared his story with us. And I'm really looking forward to introducing you to him if you don't know him yet and hear more about his exciting position with USMB. So Brian, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to get to know you a little bit better. So yeah, like I said, we heard your story briefly at convention. You just started this new role just a few days ago at the time of recording with this new church planting mobilizer. So we'll talk a lot about that, but real quick, if people haven't met you before, give us kind of a quick overview of your background, your bio, anything that you want to share with us today.
Yeah, so I grew up in Ohio. I'm a big Ohio State Buckeye fan. When I grew up in Ohio, we did go to church as a family, but the church that I attended never really taught out of the Bible. In fact, the pastor actually told, not me, but one of my friends in high school, that the Bible was a bunch of fables, myths, and fairy tales. And so it was a very different experience, but it was the only experience that I knew. Interesting thing, I do remember at that church, there was a third grade Sunday school teacher. When I was in her class, something was different about her. After I came to Christ, I went back to visit her. She wasn't attending that church anymore, and she was quite old by this time. I was out of college. And when I visited with her, I said, something was different. And 3 or 4 of us guys from your Sunday school class are Christians now. Tell me what the story is. And she decided to be an evangelist in that church. And she stayed in that church because she knew that there's young kids that needed to hear about the gospel. Now, I didn't accept Christ at third grade, but it was a planted seed that there was something different about her. She wasn't cool or fancy. She was an older widow. And when I talked with her after all that, she was much older, but there was the love of Jesus in her. And that gave me a little bit of hope, because during that season, probably all the way through my elementary years, I would wake up at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and just terrified about what was going to happen if I died. And it was almost like a phobia that it happened so frequently. Well, my parents didn't know any better at the time. And I'd go in and ask them, what do I do? What do I do? And they would just say something like, well, why don't you just be a good boy, do the best you can, and God will let you. And I even knew at third grade, what's good enough? And I always had in my mind, what's good enough? And that was never answered until I went to a different church. They were showing one of those end times movies, and the guillotine and all that terrified me, but it did get me to ask that question again with somebody who knew the answer. When I got there and sat down with this gentleman, he shared with me, and he said, you can have life in Jesus, and he will wash your sins, past, present, future. And boy, was I ready to dive in on that. Okay. That was in January of my 9th grade year. And so I was growing fast as a young believer, but I wasn't really saying much to people because I didn't actually know if there was any other Christians in my school. This was so new to me, and I had no connections. So in May of that same year, I was in a study hall, and there was at the table all my wrestling buddies, and Mark Dowdell and Bill Donnelly and Mark Smith, who were all sitting at this table. And as we were talking on that particular day, the conversation went around a friend of ours who was hit by a train and killed the Saturday before.
Wow.
And everybody was super depressed that whole week. And it made me think again, okay, I was afraid of dying, and all my friends are asking questions about dying. And maybe this is an opportunity for me to say something. Yeah. Well, my friend Mark Smith, kitty corner for me at the table, said, I wonder who'll be the next to go. That was his actual words. I wonder who'll be the next to go.
Wow. And
I remember looking at him, and all that came out of my mouth was, And I didn't follow up with any response. The very next day, Mark took a gun and played Russian roulette and shot and killed himself.
Wow.
I remember going back on Monday to school. Mark and Bill were there, but Mark Smith wasn't in his chair. It was an empty chair, and it was ringing through my head. I wonder who will be the next to go.
Yeah. And
that was probably the defining moment that to this day, I mean, that's been like 45 years ago, but that's been the defining day where I said, I feel a call that I don't ever want to leave somebody in that condition. So over the summer, I tried to get pumped up and excited about my faith, came back as a sophomore ready to roll. And I actually started sharing the gospel with friends. And I sat down with one of my friends and told him about Christ. And it was on a Friday. I remember that specifically. It was a Friday. And I surprisingly was able to lead him to Christ without much knowledge. Well, being such a baby Christian, the following Monday, we're sitting down in the same shop class, and I look at him, I say, okay, it's time for you, Larry, to share the gospel. So pick somebody out of here. You've been a Christian for 3 days. Certainly you can do this, And he calls his friend over, and he says to his friend Dale, he says, all right, Dale, when you become a Christian, this is the first words come out of his mouth. When you become a Christian, you can't be cussing and bleep like that. And he actually cussed in his testimony as he's sharing that. I was horrified. He was actually horrified when he found out what he had said. But here's the funny thing. That guy came to Christ. And there were now 3 baby Christians all in the room. And I've always told people, I said, okay, you think you can't share the gospel? You can't do worse than what he did. That was the worst I've ever heard. And so that was the beginning of this hunger for being involved in ministry. And so after high school, went off to the Moody Bible Institute, graduated from there, went into youth ministry, quite a few places, Ohio, Oklahoma, California. After that, I really felt like I wanted to get involved in church planting. So I went to a church, only worked there for 3 or 4 years, with the prospect of saying, would you be a parent church and let me work with you guys in an associate level? And they were the parent church. And we planned to work outside of Cleveland, which is a very heavily Roman Catholic area that we were working in. I almost wanted to name it St. Southern Hills. So it was so heavily Roman Catholic. And so we had an amazing ministry there. Just one, and this is just a side note, I suppose, about why church planting is so important to me. We saw in that first year about 15 people come to Christ.
Wow.
And that was a church of, it was a parachute drop. We didn't know people, but we just dropped in there. At that time, I had a kindergartner and a 3-year-old and my wife, and at least my kindergartner and my wife were interested in going, not so sure my 3-year-old. So I had 3 out of the 4 of our family. And people would ask questions about, where is your church? I said, well, we don't have a place yet. And then I'd go knocking on doors and, well, who goes to your church? Well, we don't have people yet. It was very intimidating to do.
Yeah, this. That's a rough pitch.
It was, but we fumbled and bumbled along and watched all these folks. Now it was an odd time because when we launched, we put out a massive mailer, and it hit on a Tuesday. But this particular Tuesday was September 11th, 2001.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And if you remember
Yeah.
the blip, it only lasted for a short period around the country. New York, it stayed for a while, but there was a massive attendance rise in church. People saw what happened Tuesday morning,
Yeah.
came home and pulled this flyer. And I had more phone calls that week. When is this church starting? And we launched like the week or two later, and saw a lot of people coming to Christ. Now, one of the reasons why that church plant is something I was excited about, and yet I'm also excited about traditional churches, is the mother church, which was about an hour away. So they really didn't have a lot of people that were wanting to come up. My parents and a few other people came up with us. But they invested a ton of money and training for us to get up there and get started. If you compare the numbers in that first year, a church of under 100, 15 people coming to Christ, and this mother church of over 1,000, they probably didn't see that many total come to Christ. And yet that's not, I'm not using that as a slam on them, because we wouldn't have planted. We wouldn't have had those 12 to 15 people come to Christ had the mother church not. And this is really one of the key things in my role, is to say, okay, there's a natural tendency for churches to, you go into evangelism, and then you've got to do some discipling, and then you get a lot of projects going, and it just naturally kind of wanes down. It's almost inevitable. But what I'm dreaming about is seeing how new works can walk alongside mature works and both do this together. And I think there's even infusion that can happen when it's a mutual relationship.
Yep. That's awesome. Okay. So let's pause right there, because maybe we can come back to that, because I want to dive deeper into that. But real quick. So today, one of the things we want to talk about is your new position with USMB, right? So it's funny, as we're recording, you're literally days into this. I know it's very early on. I'm sure you've got, a lot of things you're still working through, but people haven't really heard yet. So this new position, the church planting mobilizer, real quick, why don't you give us why did this position come to be? How did you land in this spot? And what are some of your kind of goals? What are you hoping to do in this new role?
Yeah. So after I left Ohio, came down, I was a pastor in Western Oklahoma for 18 years. I was on the Southern District Church Planting Board for about 15 of those years. And over the last 2 years, the new Church Planting Council formed. And one of the things with the Church Planting Council was regional people representing, so I was asked to represent the Southern District. So I jumped in there, and one of the first tasks of the Church Planting Council was to investigate having somebody in a role that could coordinate all this, because there's a lot of times even when I was on SEEK, which is the Southern District's church planting, we were all doing pastoral work and our stuff, and we'd have desires to see things happen, but there was nobody to kind of keep the glue of that together. And so as a national entity, the goal was, how do we keep the relationships, the conversations, knowledge of what's going on, encouragement? And so the job description was pretty much in that. So I looked at that, was much intimidated by it, didn't even think I would even consider applying, because I thought, okay, Ed Stetzer obviously is going to take this job. I'm not qualified for this.
Sure.
Well, Ed Stetzer never called.
And he's preoccupied.
And so I looked at it and prayed about it. And I actually, with trepidation, said, okay, because there was a terror of, well, who am I? And I think I'm wondering how many people have that who am I feeling. Well, I definitely have that. But I went ahead anyway, and I found the most encouragement from the other board members on the Church Planting Council, along with other pastors and leaders in the conference, saying, we believe that God can use you. Even if you're questioning, and that was real helpful, because I don't believe that I just want to walk into a position because I can do it. I want God to call that and be affirmed by other people.
Sure.
And so that's what happened earlier in this year. to get to this place where now I am 9 days into the job. And that's where we stand today.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, just a little bit I know about your background with your experience, youth pastor, associate pastor, planting churches. I think you've got a lot of, insight and experience that'll be really helpful to a lot of people. So church planting is something that we talk about a lot in USMB world. That's something, if people are kind of pay attention to Christian Leader or the podcast or anything in the USMB family, we talk about this a lot. So it's something that I know our USMB family is really passionate about. Can you just talk about that? You're hinting at that just a minute ago. Why is church planting so important? Like why is it that sometimes, bigger established churches have trouble seeing salvations, and why are church plants so successful? Love just to hear more of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the statistics, and sometimes statistics can get boring, but the last research the most current, because sometimes I find research that's 20 years old.
Sure.
Lifeway did something just 2 or 3 years ago, and their best research was 4,500 churches closed in 2019, and only 3,000 churches were started. So wow. There is a large growing gap between churches that are existing and the population is growing. So we've got
sure.
a big problem in that. On top of that, if you look at the age bracket, the younger you are, the less likely you are to be in church on average. And so that gap has widened. And so we have a true need for new churches, for a new generation, and for even new cultures that are coming here. 92,000 immigrants showed up in 2019 from the sub-Sahara African area. So we've got mission fields in the United States. So when we talk about home missions, we're doing missions across the world. I mean, when I was in Western Oklahoma, I was teaching public speaking on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I would have students from the Nepal area, Saudi Arabia. And so the mission field came all the way to Western Oklahoma. And so we have opportunities right in the States to do new works in that fashion. Yep. And so the other stat that surprised me was that when Olson was writing about how many people, the statistic seems to say 40% attend church. He did some diagnosis on that and said, there's no way it's that high. And his theory was that people love to say they go to church when they actually don't, because they want to look and feel good. And actually the number is about half of that. So 20% might be higher in the Bible Belt than other places, but in the Northeast and the West and just different areas. So the need's obvious. There's got to be churches launched. Yep. So then you go into what you were talking about just a moment ago. 85% statistically are churches that have plateaued and even declining. Okay. And we do not want to set them aside. We want to encourage and say, how do we keep motivating? So part of my job in that is to encourage those. And so that revitalization piece is critical and important, because we have to have that. I would say that would be considered what happened in Ohio. The church had plateaued. It was a large church, but it was plateaued. And yet they had the resources and the means and the heart to go ahead and plant a church through our work. And then it goes down from that to 10% are growing, but they consider that biological and transfer growth. Okay. And that there's really only that 5%. And that tends to be more of those in that church planting realm. And one of the real easy answers to it, I remember comparing to my time at Pine Acres, when it's a church 50, 60 years old. Well, you've got a lot of people, everybody's there. Yep. The guest is a thought, but they're not front thought. Okay. Yep. In a church plant, that guest is not just first thought, they're second, third, fourth, and fifth thought. They're going to get a lot of love and attention. It's everybody, right? Almost. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I remember the night before we launched in Ohio, I was so nervous. I thought, I've made so many contacts. I've invited so many people. Will anybody show up? Will I be preaching to an empty room? And so there's, you have to put all your eggs in that basket. And that's why church planting is so effective, is because you have to do that. Now, even church plants tend to have that little curve that goes to sustaining. But I think we can, as we work together, establish churches and church plants, helping them relate better, connect them better, partnering. I think they get the benefit of both. The new church plant gets maturity. They get discipling. They get some financial assistance. The mother churches, they get excitement from new birth and vitality. And so that's where these pieces run together, which drives my passion to see a both and approach.
Yep. That's good. Yeah, it's exciting. And, just at convention, I know they took a few minutes of one of the sessions to talk about stuff happening at Phil Weeb's church in Utah and Christian Co's in Minnesota. And there's some kind of cool stuff happening at my church, Ridgepoint in Wichita. It is like for those established churches, it's just good to hear these stories of new life and new churches. And, these buildings are packed and they need to hire someone new to help with kids or whatever. Like that does just rejuvenate us, right? It's exciting.
Newness is huge. So I just moved from Western Oklahoma to the Tulsa area, Owasso. Okay. And so I've only been in this house for a couple of weeks, and I go out and jog in the morning, and I always go out a certain path. And there's a guy who, when I either drive by or jog by from about 6 to 7 in the morning, he's out there in his front yard in a chair, and he waves, and a big arm wave. I mean, it's not like wave, it's big arm wave to everybody that comes by. And he's been so encouraging. And my wife and my daughter said, man, whenever we see him out, he waves. And so last night I saw him, I was driving, and he was out. It was about 6 o'clock. And this is just last night. And I felt compelled, I got to stop. I got to visit. And so I hopped out of the car, just ran over there and said, you've been waving the last couple of weeks since I moved over here. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Brian. And I said, what's your name? And he's an older man, very old. And he said, my name's Chris. And I said, Chris, it's good to meet you. I said, I thank you for this. And then and I might tear up with this one, because he said, well, I like to sit out here because I'm all alone. I lost my wife to Alzheimer's. And I could just see in his eyes this loneliness that he had.
Yeah.
Well, I'm new into the area, and it was a perfect starting point. So I would ask anybody listening to this, pray for my buddy Chris. I met him last night, and I'm going to be probably catching up with him this week, and want to sit down with him and even do like the 15-second gospel testimony, just learn about his life. That's kind of what happens when you get thrust into a new location, whether a plant or an established church that says, hey, we can see with new eyes because we're encouraging that. And that's where it's a both and. The planting, let's do that, but let's make sure our established churches keep their eyes out for the world.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're paying attention to moments like that. That's awesome. So yeah, let's pray for Chris. I love that. And so, just talking about the new things, right? Like, and I'm also trying to put myself in the shoes. I've been a Christian most of my life. A lot of people listening probably have years of ministry experience. So sometimes we forget that perspective of what it's like to be outside the church, right? So I'm even thinking, if I'm in a community where there's probably a lot of churches, there's probably, some reason why they haven't engaged with the local church for whatever reason, right? But even just the fact that there's a new place and they see new life, and they maybe see some excitement around a new building or whatever, like that, just that alone might provide an opportunity to talk to somebody. And like you're saying, when you're on staff or you're a volunteer at a church plant, you kind of have to go all in, and you're not going to make it, right? So I think the combination of a really energized team and just some curiosity in the community that leads to some really interesting opportunities that established churches just don't have. So I think there's a lot of cool opportunities there. So again, for people who maybe don't know too much about, the USMB church planting world, or again, what your role is going to be. So what do you see your job looking like the next handful of years? Like what are you actually going to do to try to help this grow?
All right. So my dream is, and it's a pretty large dream, and I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, but when I take a map of the United States, we have churches now. Our map has grown. We have churches now, the traditional Southern District, Central District, Pacific District, but we've got the Eastern District starting to grow with Atlanta, Tennessee, North Carolina, Maine, Virginia, Ohio. We have Congolese. We just have a lot that's going on. And so as I started to circle areas and regions, I found at least 20 sub areas that could be a nice little network or cohort. So I'll give you an example. Western Oklahoma, that's where I was. there's about 5 or 6 churches that are within just a short distance of each other: Corn, Cordell, Weatherford, Clinton, Lawton. And so what I would love to see is 20 of these little groups of 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 churches come together and say, we probably couldn't do this on our own, like a coal just sitting out there all by itself. But if we pull that in and we have it together, we can do something together. Now, there's enough already going on that if we establish 10, we could already have ministries that they could not have to start. They could just come alongside, because we've got works. And so it's matching the work that's out there that needs some support and encouragement and assistance. And we've got these cohorts or these networks or cluster groups of churches. And if we can merge those together. And so my job isn't to force this relationship. It's help those churches get together, then pray, dream, what is it? And so one group may say, we know that there's some work going on in Kansas City area with Ethiopians or the Congolese. We want to do that. Now they can have pretty much international missions right here in the United States. And so let's say that 5 or 6 churches puts their finances and efforts together. They can make an impact. They could possibly make a trip up to do a vacation Bible school, meet with the church. They can do a lot of those things. And so I'm dreaming at some point, 20, every 3 to 5 years, they keep replicating this over and over.
Yeah, cool.
And so from the West Coast to the East Coast, north to south, all of these areas having micro networks. And so there'll be little test labs, because now one network can learn something, say, hey, we could help share that with somebody else who may be new to this.
Yeah.
What tends to happen is if you try to eat that whole meal in one bite, it's too hard. Or one church tries to pull it off. Again, I said I just moved here this past month, and I'm kind of my do-it kind of person. I can do this. I'm independent. I can do this. And so my wife was already in Owasso. I was in Weatherford, and I had some huge furniture to move. And I stared it down, and I looked at it, and I thought, I just can't do it. Maybe when I was younger, but I can't do it. So I called up, and within just a short time, 6 or 8 of my buddies showed up in a half an hour, knocked out all that work. Wow. There were just like 7 or 8 really big things. And I'd probably be having back surgery today had I tried to do it myself.
Right.
But with the group, it was done. It was done quickly. And it was actually done in a fun, exciting way, because I just brought them. I was cheap. I brought them Gatorade. That was their deal. They got
not even pizza. You didn't even get a pizza. Come on, Ryan.
I didn't even give them pizza. They were only there a half an hour. You have to get an hour or more to get pizza.
Fair enough.
And that's really what it looks like with church planting. Because can you picture 5 or 6 churches, pastors, and that pastor goes back and finds 2 or 3 people in the congregation who are really excited about this? Yeah. You pull them together into a group. Now you're at 15, 20 people meeting semi-regularly with a dream that they have from God.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I tell you, I'm visualizing mini missions conferences. They may be different. They have to be Zoom, but I can imagine that a Phil Weeb from Utah either is in person or Zooming in with this church saying, hey, we want to partner with you over there in Utah. Yeah. Or down in Arizona. I'm talking to a guy right now about what's going on in Arizona. So, but we got to connect these people. We got to give them some tools, how to do this, how to be it's how to be a mama church. Mm-hmm. And that's what we want to help them do.
Yeah. Because church planning is really hard, right? I mean, the big things like finding a building and getting enough money to hire a pastor and all that kind of stuff. And even like making a logo and putting a website together, whatever. Like it's a huge undertaking. So like at where I go to church, where I work, Ridge Point, we've kind of tried church planning a little bit here and there. It's hard, and we're a big church. And so I imagine, like you're saying, if you're kind of a smaller church, maybe you don't have as many resources. I'm sure this sounds impossible. Like it might sound impossible for a little church to plant another little church. Sounds like too big. So I love the idea of, get 5, 6 churches together, build on each other's strengths, work together to make this happen. I think having someone kind of at the helm to kind of help them work together, I think is a great idea. I think that's great.
And we have so many great resource people who have done well with this, whether
Yeah.
you look at what Fred Leonard's been doing in California. There's a
Yep.
lot of things that are already there, that the idea of having to do this from scratch with no coaching
Yep.
is no longer necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the old days, in the 90s, even when I was planning in the early 2000s, it was a little bit of a, well, let's just jump out there and go after it. We don't know what we're doing. There's
Yep.
so much more material available, and we have in-source people. So we've got these cohorts coming up. Fred Leonard's running one of the cohorts with
Yep.
church planting, and say, okay,
Mhm.
how do we do this? We can have training for how to be a mother church. There is so much information and encouragement. Again, that's what it goes back to. If you're just doing this all by yourself,
Yeah.
discouragement, because Matthew 16, Jesus says, I will build my church and the gates of hell won't prevail.
Mhm.
We're of the mindset that the gates are moving towards the church, when in actuality gates don't move. The church is on offense.
Right.
But the devil wants us to think, okay, just bear down, try to endure what he's going to do to us, and stand
Yeah.
firm.
Yep.
And that's the mindset when we're alone. I
Mhm.
think when we get together as a group, we say, no, the kingdom is advancing. Satan's
Yeah.
gates, we're going to knock those down. And I know for me personally, when I'm isolated,
Mhm.
the devil can speak into my head and say,
Yep.
you can't do this. You're not worthy of that. Who do you think you are?
Mhm.
But when you get a couple of brothers and sisters together, it's a game changer.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And I love what you said earlier about, we have all these Congolese people who are kind of growing. That congregation in our USMB family is growing like crazy. And like you said, there's immigration. There's people from all over the world in America. And like your story, you're in Ohio and you didn't really know the truth about Jesus. Like you're in the middle of America. We forget that there's people like you who we just kind of think that if you're in America in this day and age, you know the truth about Jesus, and that's just not true, right? So we both have these new people coming to America and just our neighbors who haven't really heard the truth. So there's a lot of opportunity, and I think it's awesome that you're kind of leading the charge here. It's great.
Well, that really does drive home, because once I became a Christian, it was natural then to find good Christian friends.
Yep.
And I got more and more Christian friends, fewer and fewer non-Christian friends. And that's just what happens. And so I want to be creative. I have to force myself to look for ways to get into the community. That's part of the reason why for 9 years I taught at the at Southwestern in Oklahoma, Southwestern Oklahoma State.
Okay.
Because I wanted to be in the community, get out of the bubble of church, and be able to do soft evangelism, but evangelism nonetheless. And I built a lot of relationships, saw several students saved, baptized, who were in class with me, but I had to get out. And that's what it is. The established churches, we need to get out, and we need to help those new churches as they're trying to get out.
Yep. Oh, that's great. It's awesome. All right, Brian, our time's going fast here. We need to start wrapping up here. So I got two questions to kind of, as we begin to wrap up here. So most people listening to this podcast are church leaders, right? MB church leaders. So my first question is, what can we do for you if we're listening and we want to be involved in this? How can we help you kind of as you're getting started? What do you need? And second of all, if there's a church leaders listening who says, you know what, it's time for our church to get involved with this, what's their next step? If they're kind of in very, very early stages of let's do this, let's plant a church. How do we get started? So how can we help you? And what should people do if they need help?
Yeah. So there's two things I guess I would say. One is part of my job is raising funds for myself to be able to do this. So I would tremendously appreciate assistance in that to be the mobilizer. And then for the churches themselves, I really believe that getting them connected. So if I could get a phone call or a text or an email that says, I'm interested, and I would want to be, in fact, what I'm doing this week on Friday, I'm going to have a conversation with two pastors that are specifically in a region, and saying, what would it look like to have a network of of churches. And if there's any interest in that, to facilitate that, that's what I would want to do. So yeah, those are the two big things right now.
Okay, awesome. And if people are listening, so do you have an email address? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, my email is real easy. So it's Brian, Brian at USMB.org. And
Awesome.
that'd be my email. And my text number, it's 580-772-4292.
You're bold. You're going to get a lot of prank calls here after this episode releases. Well, Brian, it's just been awesome getting to know you. I love your heart for this. I know I'm sure it's a little intimidating to jump into a completely new role. But man, it's just, I love that there's a lot of energy, a lot of passion behind this from the USMB family and obviously from you specifically. So I'm looking forward to hearing lots and lots of stories of new churches planted, new people coming to know Jesus. Hopefully, not necessarily because of you, not necessarily because of us, but because we're going to work together to do some really good things. So thank you in advance for jumping into this new role. And yeah, we just look forward to hearing what comes next. So thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks for having me.
I guess as we wrap up, is there anything we missed? Anything else you want to leave us with today?
Well, the only thing I would add is when I read 1 Corinthians 3, it says, Paul planted, Apollos watered, but God, he's the one that grows, right?
Yep, exactly.
I look at myself as that kind of that Apollos. I'm the water boy for the U.S. conference. That's what I see myself. I am not a fancy guy. I'm the water boy. Whatever needs to happen, if a pastor or a church needs encouragement, I'm going to come over there and bring a bottle of water. We're going to get you encouraged to be able to do the work. And we've got to all work together. I don't have any interest in coming in with a script, a plan on how people should do this. There's so many different ways people can plant churches. That's where the regional areas make the difference. I just want to be the encourager and bring a bottle of water.
That's awesome. We should all do that, right? Like that's a good role for all of us to have. So awesome, Brian. Well, great getting to know you. Thanks so much for your time today.
C-Link is the online bi-monthly newsletter featuring news and stories from the Christian Leader magazine. C-Link delivers timely news to your email inbox so you can stay up to date with what's happening in our districts, agencies, and partners. Sign up for C-Link today on the Christian Leader website at www.christianleadermag.com.
Well, one more time, thank you to Brian for his time today and for this awesome new position with USMB. I'm excited to see what all comes out of this next chapter. And again, if your church is maybe looking for ways to get involved with church planting, I do encourage you to reach out to Brian. Again, he shared his email address. It's just brian@usmb.org. Or if you want to text him either for real or send him a prank text, he was bold enough to share his phone number, so you can scrub back and find that if you like it. Okay, well, thanks again so much for listening today, wherever you are. So grateful for those of you who turn in every episode. We're grateful for you. Hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time right here on the Lead Pods.
Thanks for listening to Lead Pods. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing to our show wherever you're listening today. Learn more by visiting usmb.org. And be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you next time as we learn more practical tools to increase our impact together.